Well, hello there, and welcome to a new Seeing Clearly with Charlotte Giblin. And you get a different side of me today. I'm normally on the other side of the frame, and as I was setting this one up, and I thought, no, I really need to be on this side. And at this point in the story, I do actually start seeing myself from a very different perspective, and I thought, oh no, that is so corny that you are physically seeing a different side of me, but that's the way it is. So this is all about choice and change. And this painting, we are carrying on directly from the Seeing Clearly videos 9 and 10, which were about the letting go with the paintbrush. This was one of those really creepy forests when I took my and solved the whole let the brush do the work issue. If you haven't seen that one, it'll make you feel so much better about yourself and your own art practice. And then number 10, which was starting to tell that crucial, pivotal story about admitting that I wasn't being honest with myself, with the people around me, particularly in my relationship, and the choice to acknowledge that and then to start making some changes incrementally, small steps to start with, after the really big decision to accept this responsibility and to make some change. That's where we pick up from. And this painting, I think, tells a really helpful story about choosing to face the unknown. And I often bring this painting out when I've got students in and we might be looking at just the general anxiety about taking risks with learning something new. A lot of my adult students may have had difficult experiences with previous tutors, or they were told negative things as a child, even about their painting and their artwork, and it just destroyed their passion and destroyed their love, and which is such a shame. But then they found the courage to try a new tutor and to approach something new. And very often we'll look at this painting and we'll actually talk about the comfort of being in a negative situation because it's what we know. And actually choosing to make change can feel so overwhelming and so uncomfortable that a lot of people just don't even get started. And I know this personally from my own experience of being in the same patterns of behavior for just so many years until the manifested stress-related illnesses were just too much to bear. And I just knew, and I mentioned this in the previous video, that I am responsible for myself, for the decisions that I make. I am ultimately responsible, therefore, for my own health and well-being. Nobody else is going to make those positive decisions for me. So if I want to live a healthier life, which has more potential and knits together all of the different parts of me that had become completely fractured over previous decades of role playing and hiding certain parts of me and having a professional sheen and all of the anxiety. And because we all have this professional front, don't we, that we like to put out. I don't necessarily mean in a business sense, but we have our outward social persona. And there are so many different layers of self behind those. And what's happened for me now is that the outward professional social persona is actually the self that goes right through all of the layers. It's now I've been able to integrate all of these different forms of my personality and eradicate any of the nervousness about exposing my real self and letting my real Charlotte shine out, and have been able to get rid of any of those the anxiousness about it and the fear, and been able to make changes to the way I react to repeated situations which used to cause me great anxiety and nervousness. But it's taken a lot of practice. And the initial stage of making that decision to want to change was very powerful. And I'm sure there were many, many times that I thought I'd made significant change and then realized, oh no, I'm actually stuck in the same spiral. But my mum, for instance, who suffered from a great deal of mental health issues and had anorexia, she found it almost impossible to change and wanted to change all the time. And it was heartbreaking watching her regret as each time she would try and make significant changes, the next day, and I'll start again. It's very difficult to watch somebody else not be able to help themselves. And that was a huge part of my journey of having to step back. I'd adopted this enormous role of responsibility for making other people feel better and ahead of my own well-being. And there came a point where I had to say, you know what? I'm not well. I've given everything to everybody else. And at what point do I start looking after myself? And that was very frightening because it meant that I would become a different version of myself. I didn't know who this new Charlotte was going to be. And would other people like her? What if everybody just ran away because I've turned into this selfish person who is only looking after herself? Of course, that's not what happened, and it doesn't work like that. But the point is that making the decision to change, regardless of actually changing, is very complicated for some people, and it can take absolutely ages. But what I want to say to you is that it's 100% worth it. It's worth the pain of the challenge and all of the every little step, because you never have to just suddenly, we think about the end result immediately, don't we? We don't think about all of the little steps along the way. And so you never have to see yourself from zero to the finish line. Every little change, you gain confidence. You think, oh, that didn't quite work. I'm still getting those negative reactions. I'll try something slightly different tomorrow. Or in 5 minutes, or every little step towards the bigger change that you envisage is helpful and puts everything into a new perspective. And this is where our art practice, my art practice, has been absolutely invaluable. And I talk about this in every video because the skills that you learn as an artist, and you don't need to be an artist to think about these as emotional development tools. The seeing clearly, which is from an artist's perspective, it's about seeing things as they actually are, learning the skill of translating a still life or an object realistically. And you have to learn how to look and slow yourself down and see what's there. So it's getting an honest perspective and being able to use that honest perspective, turning that mirror towards yourself, is incredibly helpful when you're wanting to make any kind of personal change. And gaining that perspective could be journaling, it could be talking to friends, it could be painting and discovering things about yourself like I did through the images that you were painting, or you have images in your head of things you want to paint, and maybe they're quite alarming images, and you think, well, why am I having that particular imaginary image of myself or something that I want to paint? What is going on there? There are so many different ways to gain perspective. And the second part of this sort of program, if you like, that I learned for myself is the skills development, which from an artistic perspective, that's about techniques and practice. Practicing the techniques so you get much more confident about using your material and being able to tell the stories that you want to once you've gained that clearer vision. With emotional development, it's also about practice. It's about practicing changing your behavior, and it might be tiny little steps. So you make one change each day, you start using slightly different words, start saying no, turning down opportunities which don't feel right for you, being a little bit firmer with the people around you who are demanding things of you, creating some space for yourself so you can go for a walk or paint, do something, create space that will allow you to do the things that really feed your soul, which I know is so much harder in reality than me just throwing it out like that. And that was something that bothered me so much about a lot of the self-help books that I used to read, that the impression was given that you could just do it in 3 weeks and you'd suddenly be a different version of yourself. And I wish that somebody had told me at the time, you know what, there's going to be absolutely loads of snot and tears. This is going to be, and you're going to stamp your feet quite a lot. This is going to be a hideous journey at points, but it's really, really worth it. And it might take 5 years, it might take 10, but every little change, every day where you start seeing that you're reacting differently to situations that always used to cause you pain, you start seeing other people's different reaction to you as they, oh, she's being a bit more assertive. They start behaving differently. The confidence is reflected back. And if somebody has a real issue with you feeling better about yourself, well, you know what all the advice says about that. And that also is much harder to do than it says in the books. It's really hard just to cut people off. And quick aside, that's what my partner had to do, who was a chef. And he was involved in hospitality his entire life, really, really, really difficult industry. And there's a great deal of toxic behavior in hospitality, a lot of drinking, a lot of drug taking. That's never been my world, but it was his. And he found that the only way that he could create lasting change for himself, and it was with my support, of course, well, not of course, but of course, he could only reinvent himself having removed himself from the industry. He tried to continue in the same industry that he'd been in for 25 years, behaving differently. And it was so challenging, it was so difficult, and he was afraid of repeating the same patterns that he completely removed himself from the situation. Now that is remarkable and very, very difficult to do. And he was only able to do it because I felt really strongly, we felt together as a team, that his mental health, his ability to be able to be allowed to heal, just as I was being allowed to become a different version of myself in the relationship. That was far more important, that he removed himself completely from the industry and didn't work and took some time out, maybe thought about what he wanted to do, if anything, to help bring money in. And as long as we had enough, that was what mattered. And it was a huge relief to finally see him make that decision and step away from such a damaging industry that he couldn't cope with. And it didn't help me at the time with the role of responsibility I'd adopted way before he'd left the industry, but this role of responsibility for bringing in money. As an artist, I was already feeling the guilt of not selling enough paintings and covering my expenses and being a burden and all of those things that so many creative people can carry with them. And I was working part-time and had wonderful creative jobs, but I wasn't prepared for how much anxiety it would create for me when I suddenly became the sole breadwinner. And there was a lot of trauma involved with that for me. But we worked around it because ultimately, and I knew inside, once I got past the ego fear of how am I going to earn enough money, and I started teaching full-time, by the way, and it was very successful after a period of maybe 6 months of building up my classes and building up my reputation. But it was the best thing we could ever have done for us as a couple and also as individuals. But he had to completely remove himself from his situation and was supported to do that. And that can be very hard for us to face. And back to the painting. So the forest test, which isn't really a test, that makes it sound like there's a right and a wrong answer, but it's really interesting to contemplate how you feel about being in the forest. So I've always been a looking to the light kind of person. I've always looked over the hill, but looking to the future, like, oh, this is exciting. What's next? What's next? I mean, almost to the detriment of appreciating what's happening right now. And I had to do a series of paintings with loads of detail in the foreground and very little on the horizon because I was trying to convince myself, come on, focus on what's happening now. But on that note, another thing that's bothered me about self-help gurus, the idea that all we have is the present moment, the now. Okay, yeah, I get with that. But the idea that there are only certain things you can do to appreciate the present moment, like stopping and listening to the birds in the trees or counting the petals on the daisy that's in front of you in the field, they are very helpful, especially if you find nature really invigorating, and as I do. I cannot go for a day without going for a walk in the woods or getting out of the house. I've got to be outside in nature, but I'm not always looking at every leaf and appreciating the forest. There are plenty of times I've got music in my ears and I'm off in another world. And I've had these fantastic imaginative worlds with me since I was a child. And they are problem-solving places. They are escapism. They're exciting. I can be all kinds of different versions of myself, and I could test out different ways of being without having to do it in real life. And that, for me, is a present moment activity, even though it's not rooted in the reality of what is immediately around me. And I think it could be really dangerous. It's another thing for us to have negative judgment about ourselves over. Like, oh no, I've been going for a walk and listening to music and imagining myself playing the bass on stage, and here I've forgotten to look at the leaves on the floor and I'm a bad person. It's whatever I feel. If there's something that brings you joy in the moment, even if it's planning the future, that is your now. And getting that balance between appreciating the cup of tea that you've got or the glass of water, while also enriching your now with plans. So I've always wanted to go out into the brightness and see what's there. I've got that curiosity, that anticipation. And yet I discovered over decades that I was really comfortable staying in the shadows, in the familiarity of the darkness, and being afraid of radical change. I used to think I liked radical change until I actually started to make radical changes, like saying to my partner that I was going to leave him and then admitting, well, actually, hang on, sorry, I'm the one who hasn't been honest in the relationship, so I better start from scratch now and tell you how I really feel about things. I got comfortable in my uncomfortable routines of playing certain roles, resenting things in my head, not enjoying the job, feeling pressured. Oh, yes, I'll go and do this for you. Yes, I'll help you with that. Who's going to help me? All of the negative chatter or the desperation and the frustration that we get trapped in and feel like it's too hard to go, stop, hang on. I'd like to ask something, or I'd like to do something different, or I want to walk out the door and leave you to do all the washing up and the laundry and everything else. And I got used to being very comfortably trapped and just looking at the emerald green grasses periodically and thinking, oh, well, one day when I've lost this amount of weight or I've made this amount of money, then I'll be ready to go into the brightness of the unknown. And I get it. I get how difficult it can be. But ultimately, it's only us who can make any decisions to improve our lives. And that is horribly boring because it gives all of the onus on us. It puts all the responsibility on us, and that's really difficult. So easy giving other people advice, isn't it? Because you don't have to do anything about it. You can see with the perspective that we're gifted with how someone else is living their life incorrectly. And although we never really know what's going on in anybody else's life, having to apply that mirror to us, really hard, which is why the art practice of seeing clearly, developing your skills, and then learning to take risks, trust your intuition, letting go of the negative judgments in your art practice and also in your personal life and emotional development. Though it takes a while, it takes stages, it takes practice to build up confidence to make change. And for me, after making that massive decision to leave my partner, and this was it, I was going to start fresh, I had to acknowledge that the main reason I wanted to leave was so I didn't have to address all of the problems that I had within me. And I knew that if I didn't address those problems, they would simply present in the next relationship. I am such a believer in lessons needing to be learned. And if you don't learn a certain lesson, it will just pop up again next time round. But if you do learn it, then you can move that aside. You might get tested a few times, move it aside. Great, what's next? And in my early 40s, I had been presented time and time and time again with challenges and tests in relationships in which I would always defer to somebody else's needs before my own, creating all kinds of negative back chatter in my head, all kinds of internalized stress and resentment, as I've said, which manifested as illness. And I was afraid to speak out and say anything because that would be a different version of myself. So I had to find a huge amount of courage to suddenly change that pattern and attempt to break the pattern, learn a lesson about putting myself first and seeing that actually, if I did that, it was not only going to be better for me, but better for the people around me. And then move on. And I've learned that lesson. It was quite dramatic. And I've had to do some dramatic things in my life to create change, like emigrating to New Zealand on a one-way ticket, having never been here before, with a suitcase and my partner, after we'd been together maybe 9 months. That was a drastic change. And it was a drastic change saying that I was going to leave, as opposed to addressing the relationship issues as they cropped up. And I think we do get pushed to a limit, don't we, where there's a breaking point, and then it's just feels too overwhelming. There's too many things to have to address. It was just easier just to leave. And I think that overwhelm of information, that overwhelm of wanting to change, can prevent us from even making any kind of start. And the discomfort that we get used to, the way that we understand, I better the devil you know, and just keep ourselves in this situation. I've seen it so many times, and I've felt it. And just making that decision to start changing, that decision to just look at yourself with a different perspective and, okay, so where are these negative feelings arising? When are they arising? Okay, there's a repeated pattern of when I'm starting to feel an adrenaline kick. You know, it's all different for all of us, but maybe somebody says something to you which gets you, and it reminds you of being a kid at school when you were picked on, and you know, these things build up, and then every time that there's a slightest hint of the same issue, the same situation reoccurring, we're reminded of how much it hurt us when we were a child, or whatever traumatic event triggered then this fearful reaction. And until we can start changing those reactions, we do get stuck in a loop that just feels almost impossible to leave. And I always say, I think about the simplicity of the traffic lights. As soon as you get a negative adrenaline kick, then stop. Just give yourself, hang on, stop. Where is this coming from? And pause. Use the magic of the amber pause, because we don't give ourselves time to pause. Pause. Get some perspective, like what's going on here? Where is this coming from? Now, have I been in this situation before? Can I react differently? Can I choose to change the way that I'm going to move forward through the forest? Am I going to go into a slightly brighter, unknown answer, an unknown way forward, an unknown path? Or am I going to just keep myself in that negative, reactionary pattern that I am used to because it's comfortable, because I know it? And then green, go. When you've got all the information you need, when you've gained some perspective, then you can decide, you can choose how to react. And choosing a slightly different reaction, which makes you feel better, which answers your call to well-being, which just makes you feel like you're moving towards your brightness, that is the decision that you need to start moving towards. And in my relationship, I looked inside and I knew that I needed to stay in the relationship. I knew that I was with the right person, and I knew that I still had so many things to learn. And I knew that if I didn't start trying to make change little by little, I was going to be stuck in the same pattern the whole time. And I'm a totally different version of myself from the one 10 years ago or 7 years ago when this happened, when this painting was done. So start thinking about your own situation and the comfort that you feel within the forest, or whether if you're galloping towards the light all the time, you probably haven't even got this far in the video, because you definitely don't need any help and you're like well on the way. But think about why you're trapping yourself in the dark situation. And I know from my experience, it's for ease. It's for ease, isn't it? We don't want to go through the hassle, the inconvenience of making change, but you don't have to do it all at once. And it is worth it, I promise you. And your art practice, the focus, anytime you're worried about stuff, you can bury yourself, you can escape into your art practice, you can focus on seeing things as they really are, you can develop your skills, you can go out in nature and start really looking at the trees and imagine how you would paint them. Use your art practice to help you gain a much deeper wisdom about the world around you, about yourself, and about how to move forward to a much brighter, sunnier version of you. I've done it. I'm proof of it. And I know that even if there's just the tiniest bit of my story which gives you comfort, which gives you inspiration, which helps you feel that it's possible from such a realist's point of view, or even if I can if I can help you paint more and use that as a wonderful way to escape into a different world, then my work is done. But I really hope that you can feel encouraged that anything's possible, change is possible. But look at yourself with honest eyes and think about why you haven't been able to make the changes you wanted to so far. And step by step, it never has to be done all in one go. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.